Hello, this is Slow Night, Ancient Tales. The path we will walk together tonight begins on a late spring street veiled in thick fog and leads to a deep mountain temple resting beneath red autumn leaves. In the pitch-black night where nothing can be seen, a young man's wandering begins, guided only by the sound of the rippling water. His anxious footsteps, wandering aimlessly after stepping through the prison gates, trace along winding, rugged mountain trails. At last, they are met by the resonant toll of a serene temple bell, whispering comfort and urging him to lay down all worldly burdens. Did you feel lost and overwhelmed today, as if walking blindly through a dense fog? If so, please set your heavy burdens down here for a moment. Listen quietly to this poignant yet majestic journey of a man who silently kept walking through the turbulent waves of his era. The breathless night spent hiding from the eyes of the world, and the profound comfort found in a single warm bowl of porridge will gently soothe your weary heart. Now, comfortably close your eyes and let us follow the deep, slow rhythm of those ancient footsteps. The path of wandering. I was out of prison, but I did not know where to go. The late spring night was thick with fog, and having only passed through Incheon once years ago on my way to sightsee in Seoul, the streets were unfamiliar, and I couldn't tell where I was. Wandering the sandy beach in the pitch-black night where I couldn't see an inch ahead, feeling my way by the sound of the waves, I found at the break of dawn that after all my running, I had only reached the Yeongdong Ridge, right behind the superintendent's office. As I took a brief breath and looked around, a police officer was running toward me from a few dozen paces away, his sword clattering loudly. I hid myself under the wooden board covering the furnace of a roadside shop. The police officer's swinging scabbard passed by, seemingly grazing the tip of my nose. When I came out from the furnace, it was already brightly lit, and I could see the spire of a Catholic church. Figuring that was the east, I walked toward it. I went to a house and called for the owner. When asked who it was, I said, "Mister, please come out." He came out and looked at me with suspicious eyes. I told him I was Kim Chong-soo, that the Incheon superintendent had secretly released me last night. But since I couldn't walk the streets in broad daylight looking like this, I asked him to let me stay in his house until nightfall. The owner refused, saying no. As I went a little further, a day laborer with his top knot exposed and wearing a durumagi overcoat came down the road singing. I again told him the truth and asked for a way out, and the man very kindly led me through narrow back alleys, dodging people's eyes, all the way to the Hwagedong Ridge. He pointed out, "This way is Suwon, and that way is Sihung. Take whichever road you please." It is my regret that I couldn't ask his name. Intending to go to Seoul, I stepped onto the road to Sihung. Looking at my appearance, anyone would truly call me a thief. Having lost all my hair to typhoid fever, the newly grown hair was tied with a string into a thin, pine needle-like top knot. I had a towel wrapped around my head, and I was wearing only a short upper garment without a durumagi. Yet the clothes were new, not those of a poor man, though stained with the dirt I had picked up while crawling underground. Even to my own eyes, I did not look like an ordinary person. I walked about 5 outside the Incheon city limits, and the sun rose. The sound of a whistle drifted on the wind, and silhouettes of people could be seen sparsely on the mountain. Looking like this, I thought I would be caught in the dragnet even if I hid in the mountains, so employing a tactic of deception, I decided it was better to hide right by the main road. I went into a patch of small pine trees along the road, hid myself under a cluster of pines, and lay down. For the parts of my face that couldn't be hidden, I broke off pine branches and covered them. Sure enough, sword-bearing police officers and hat-wearing prison guards walked past right beside where I lay, chattering among themselves. From their conversation, I learned that Jo Deok-gun had fled to Seoul and Yang Bong-gu had escaped by boat. And regarding me, they said, "Kim Chang-soo is a strongman, so he'll be hard to catch. Well, it's good that he ran away. What's the point of rotting in prison?" I heard these words. I could fully recognize whose voices they were. I stayed hidden in the pine clump all day, and only came out from my spot after seeing the police officers and the guard Kim Jang-suk pass by my feet again, returning to Incheon. It was already dusk. I had come out But having not had a drop of water or a wink of sleep since my early dinner yesterday, I was hungry, and my body was so exhausted that it was difficult to take even a single step. I went to a house in a nearby village and told them I was a man from Chongpa, Seoul, who had been shipwrecked in front of Bukchong, Oji, while returning from buying rice in Yunnan, Hwanghae Province, and asked for some food. The owner brought me a bowl of porridge. I took out a rosewood-framed mirror I had kept on my person, received as a token from someone, and gave it to the child of the house as a bribe, asking to stay the night, but I was refused. Looking back on it, it was as if I had paid 1 yang of brass coins to eat a bowl of porridge. At that time, 1 yang was worth more than a mal, about 18 liters of rice. I went into the guest room of another house, but was rejected again, so having no other choice, I decided to sleep in a mill. I carried over some bundles of straw lying nearby, covered myself with them, and lay down, saying to myself, the 2-year Incheon prison play drops its curtain here, and sleeping in a mill is the beginning of the second act. I recited Sun Tzu's Art of War and the 3 strategies aloud. Passers-by saying, "A beggar is reading out loud," did not bother me, but when someone else said, "He's no ordinary beggar. Seeing him come to the guest room earlier, he's a suspicious man," it made me very nervous. So to act like a madman, I rambled and hurled curses to myself until I fell asleep. I woke up early at dawn, headed toward Byoragoge, and walked along a narrow path. Thinking I would beg for food, I stood in front of a house's gate. Remembering how beggars would vigorously and loudly demand food, I tried calling out, "Please give me some food." In my mind, I was shouting at the top of my lungs, but the sound that came out was barely louder than a dog's bark. The owner said they had no rice and gave me a bowl of sung, scorched rice water, to drink. I drank it and walked again. After living in a narrow world for a long time, it was truly wonderful and refreshing to come out into the vast world and walk briskly wherever I wanted to go. Forgetting my hunger, I sang and folk songs I had learned in prison, passed through Bupyeong and Sihung, and reached the Yangwado ferry crossing on that same day. If I only crossed the river, it would be Seoul, but the day was getting dark, I was hungry, and I didn't have the fare to take the ferry. So, I sought out the village school. When I asked to greet the teacher, he spoke down to me upon our first meeting, perhaps because he saw I was young and my attire was unkempt. With a straight face, I said, "How can a teacher be so arrogant and rude, and how can such a person teach others?" My luck was bad for a moment, and I met thieves on the road, losing my clothes and luggage, which is why I face you in this state. But where is the law that allows one to treat a person with such disdain? Ha! To think I sought out someone who might know etiquette, only to suffer this humiliation. I both scolded him and acted as if to leave. The teacher immediately apologized and formally asked for greetings again. Then we spent the night debating literature, and in the morning the teacher wrote a letter and gave it to a child to deliver to the ferry owner, allowing me to cross without paying the fare. I went to find Jin Oijung, whom I had befriended in prison. This man was a steward at Namyongwei Shrine. He and 5 or 6 brassware makers from Beoge had been caught completely red-handed on a boat in the Incheon Sea while instigating the counterfeiting of nickel coins, and he had spent a year in prison with me. Saying they owed me a debt they could never forget in their lifetime, they had left me with the words to be sure to find them on the day I was released. It was dusk when I arrived at Yonghui Shrine. Jin Oijung came out to the edge of the wooden porch, stared at me blankly, and then cried out, "Oh my goodness, who is this?" He ran down to the yard in just his socks and clung to me. He then pulled my hand, took me into the room, and after hearing the story of how I had gotten out, he both called his family members to greet me and sent someone to invite his former accomplices. Saying my appearance was too suspicious, they chipped in, 1 item per person. I will buy a gat hat. I will buy a mangin headband. I will provide a durumagi. Thus, when I finally wore proper attire for the first time in 3 or 4 years, tears naturally fell from my eyes. Like this, I gathered and played with Jin Oijung's group every day, lingering for a few days. During that time, I went to find Jo Deokun twice, but making various excuses, he completely refused to meet me. He seemed to think it was not beneficial to acknowledge knowing a heavy criminal like me. After eating well, playing well, and resting for a few days at Jin Oijang's house, I crossed the Dongjak ferry with a heavy load of travel money collected by everyone, setting off to tour the 3 southern provinces. At that time, my heart was deeply depressed, so I started drinking from a place called Songbang Tol, staggering in heavy drunkenness every day. By the time I reached the Osan market in Suwon, I had already spent the entire load of money. I decided to seek out Kim Samchok's house, located west of Osan Market. The owner had served as a Samchok Yongjang military commander, and he had 6 sons. His eldest son, Kim Dong-hun, had been doing business in Incheon port but failed, and during the month he suffered in Incheon prison, he and I became close friends. When he was released from prison, he held my hand and firmly promised that we would meet again in the future. I received a grand welcome at Kim Samchok's house. I drank and sang day and night with his 6 sons for several days, and after even receiving travel money, I set off on the road again. I found Gongjong Ryol in Ganggyong. He was also someone I had befriended in Incheon prison. I had also gotten to know his mother when she came to visit him in prison, so I received much hospitality. Through Gongjong Ryol's introduction, I found his brother-in-law, Jin Sonjeon, in Muju, Jeolla province. Then, since I was already in the southern provinces, I decided to visit Kim Hyung-jin in Namwon and went to find Idong Gwitgol. The villagers said that Kim Hyung-jin's family had indeed lived in this village for generations, but after Kim Hyung-jin joined the Donghak movement years ago and fled with his family, there had been no news. I was deeply disappointed. I remembered hearing from Kim Hyung-jin that Choi Gun-son, who ran a pharmacy inside the south gate of Jeonju, was his brother-in-law, so I went to find him. However, Choi spoke very coldly, saying it was true he was his brother-in-law, but speaking resentfully, he only mentioned that Hyung-jin had placed a heavy burden on him and had already died. Unable to suppress my sorrow, I wandered around the city center. It happened to be market day in Jeonju, so there were many people. I stood in front of a cotton cloth shop and saw a young man selling cotton. His appearance closely resembled Kim Hyung-jin, so I waited for him to finish bargaining and come out. I grabbed him and asked, "Are you Mr. Kim?" When he said yes, I asked again, "Are you not the younger brother of Mr. Kim Hyung-jin?" He hesitated, perhaps feeling suspicious, and couldn't answer. I said, "I am Kim Chang-soo from Haeju, Hwanghae Province. Did you perhaps hear about me when your older brother was alive?" Only then did he shed tears and tell me that not only had his brother frequently talked about me when he was alive, but even on his deathbed, he had said his dying regret was not being able to see me. I followed the young man to his house in Wonpyeong, Gumgu. It was a small farmhouse. When he informed his mother and sister-in-law that I had come, the sound of wailing shook the house. It was the 19th day since Kim Hyung-jin had passed away. I wailed before the spirit tablet set up at the mourning altar and paid my respects to the old mother and the young widow who lived alone after her husband's death. The deceased had a son named Meng Mun, who was 8 or 9 years old, and his younger brother had a son named Meng Ryol. Thinking of my departed friend, I rested at this house for a few more days and then went to Mokpo. It wasn't that I had any specific purpose. At that time, Mokpo was a newly opened port, a sparse place where government buildings had not even been fully constructed yet. Here, I coincidentally met Yang Bonggu. He was one of the 4 who had escaped prison with me. From him, I heard that Jo Deokun had been caught again, losing an eye and breaking his leg, and that the guard Kim, who had been on duty at the time, had died from opium addiction. He said he hadn't heard any rumors about me. Yang Bonggu gave me a little travel money and advised me to leave quickly, saying this place had become an open port where people from all 8 provinces gathered, so it wasn't a place to stay for long. I left Mokpo, passed through Gwangju, and stayed overnight as a guest at the house of Scholar Lee at the famous Yungmojung Pavilion in Hampyeong. Scholar Lee was not a wealthy man, but Yungmojung always had many guests, and when serving meals to the guests, Scholar Lee also received his table and ate alongside them. The dining table was entirely equal for both host and guest, without the slightest discrimination, and the attitude the servants showed the guests was exactly the same as how they treated their master. This was an expression of the host Scholar Lee's character. It was a truly astonishing model of conduct and family tradition. Yungmojung was Scholar Lee's pavilion, and inside it, a bedroom, dining room, reception room, reading room, and resting room were fully equipped. The two young students reading texts there at the time are the present brothers Lee Jae-hyuk and Lee Jae-sung. I tried to leave after resting for one night, but Scholar Lee firmly detained me. His words telling me to stay as long as I liked carried a quiet, profound affection. Moved by the host's sincerity, I stayed at Yungmojung for another 15 days. Hearing that I was leaving Scholar Lee's house tomorrow, there was a man who invited me to his home. He was a middle-aged scholar, somewhat older than me, who had come every day to converse while I stayed at Yungmojung. Unable to refuse his invitation, I went to his house for dinner. The house was truly like a crab shell, with only a single room. The wife brought in the dinner on a dog-legged table, to be shared between the host and me. When I opened the lid of the rice bowl, it wasn't rice, but something unrecognizable. I scooped a spoonful and put it in my mouth. The taste was as bitter as bear gall. It was a thick porridge made of rice bran and red beans. The host had seen me eating white rice and good side dishes every day at Scholar Lee's house, yet without any expression of pity or apology, he cheerfully ate it himself and offered it to me. Deeply moved by his high ideals and deep sincerity, I ate it all without leaving a single bit. I left Hampyeong, toured Gangjin, Gogumdo, and Wando, and passed through Janghung to go to Boseong. In Boseong, I met a clansman named Kim Gwang-eon, who lived in Dongyang-ri, Songgokmyeon. I heard the name was changed to Dongyangmyeon now. I stayed in various houses of that clan for over 40 days, and upon leaving, I received a brush pouch from Lady Son, who lived in that village, as a gift, a poem or item given to someone setting off on a long journey, like a wedding procession. Leaving Boseong, I toured Hwasun, Dongbok, and Damyang, stopped by Magoksa Temple in Hadong to see the Chilbul-Ajabang, the cross-shaped room of Chilbulam Hermitage, and came back up to Chungcheong Province. By the time I arrived at Magoksa Temple on Jeryongsan Mountain, it was late autumn, with persimmons ripening bright red on the branches and fallen leaves scattering. I bought lunch at the temple and as sitting there when a sightseer, who said he had come from Donghaksa Temple, ordered lunch. After exchanging names, he said he was Mr. Lee, living in Gongju. Judging by his age, he seemed over 40, and whether from the self-composed poems he recited or his speech, he seemed to be a man harboring much pessimism. Although it was our first meeting, our frank and open words resonated with each other. When he asked where I was heading, I replied that I was born and raised in Gyeseong, took up commerce as a profession, but after failing, I left out of frustration to see the rivers and mountains and had been wandering the 3 southern provinces for almost a year. He then suggested we go see Magoksa Temple together, as it was only 40 away. I had heard of Magoksa when I was young, reading the Dongguk Myeongnyeonok, record of famous sages of the eastern country. In the story where Sohwadam, Gyeongdeok, saw a monk fall into a red bean porridge cauldron at Magoksa and die, witnessing it while offering winter solstice greetings inside the palace. I left Jeryongsan Mountain and headed toward Magoksa with Mr. Lee. While walking on the road, Mr. Lee mentioned that he was a widower, that he had been a teacher at a private village school for many years, and that he was now going to Magoksa to become a monk. He asked what I thought about joining him. I didn't completely lack the thought of becoming a monk, but since it was a sudden question, I did not answer immediately. It was already dusk when we crested the pass in front of Magoksa. The mountains were full of autumn foliage, yellow and red, deepening the sentiment of "the wanderer feels sorrow at the autumn wind." Magoksa was submerged in the evening fog, as if hiding from our eyes, which had been soiled by the dust of the world. The sound of the temple bell rang out. It was the sound announcing the evening Buddhist service. It sounded as if it were telling us to cast away all worldly afflictions. Mr. Lee firmly asked again, "Brother Kim, what will you do? Let us forget all worldly affairs and become monks together." I smiled and replied, "What is the use of talking about it here? Let us decide at the table, facing the one who wishes to become a monk and the one who makes monks. We parted the fog, descended the pass, and walked into the temple gate step by step. With every step, my body was moving from a dirty world to a clean world, from hell to paradise, from the secular world to the world beyond. Passing Maewadang and crossing a long wooden bridge spanning a babbling stream, we entered Simgeomdang, where a balding old monk who had been looking at an unrolled painting saw us and greeted us. Mr. Lee was an old acquaintance of this monk, whose name was Pobongdang. Mr. Lee left me in Simgeomdang and went elsewhere. Soon, a meal prepared for me was brought out. As I sat after clearing the dinner table, a white-haired old monk came and politely greeted me. I lied, saying that I was originally from Songdo, had lost my parents early, had no close relatives, and was wandering alone to see the rivers and mountains. At that, the old monk said his secular surname was Baso, so that he was from Iksan, and that it had been 50 years since he shaved his head to become an old monk. He then earnestly requested that I become his disciple. I humbly declined, saying that my natural talents were dull and my learning shallow, and I feared I would only become a burden to the old master. However, he strongly urged me, asking if I knew that by simply becoming his disciple, I could study Buddhist teachings under a distinguished master and become a great lecturer in the future. The next day, Mr. Lee, who had already shaved his head as smooth as an egg, came to greet me and said that Haandang was the disciple of the wealthy Master Bogyong within this temple. He urged me to shave my head quickly, saying that if I just became Haandang's disciple, I would have no worries about tuition expenses for my studies. Having my worldly thoughts cooled like ashes after one night of pure living, I also decided to renounce the world. A little later, following my junior disciple Hodioxum, who held a brass knife, I went out to the stream and crouched down. Deoxum mumbled the hair-shaving mantra, and with a chilling sensation on my head, my top knot fell onto the sand. Although it was a decision I had already made, I could not stop the tears from falling along with my hair. The bell rang in the main hall. It was announcing my ordination ceremony. Hundreds of monks wearing kasayas and robes gathered from the various hermitages within the mountain, and in the kitchen, the temple cook was preparing rice for the Buddhist offering. I, too, wore a black robe and a red kasaya and was led into the Dung Bojyon, main Buddha hall. Beside me, Deoksam taught me how to bow to the Buddha. My master, Ha Undang, named my Dharma name Wonjong and announced it to the Buddha. The precept-giving master, Master Yongdam, read the scriptures and bestowed the 5 precepts upon me. After the ceremony ended, I took turns bowing to the elderly masters in the mountain, starting with Master Bogyong. And so every day I studied the practice of bowing, memorized the mantra collection, read the Chobalsim Jagyongmun, admonitions for beginners, and learned the various manners and rules of being a monk. Regarding mental cultivation, they said, in a monk's conduct, lowering oneself is the foremost, thus making it a priority to detach from an arrogant mind. They taught us to have a respectful heart not only toward humans but even toward animals and insects. My master, Haandang, who had been so polite when negotiating with me to become a monk last night, started from the very next afternoon. Hey Wonjong. Using completely informal speech, he would say, "This fellow is born looking so foolish, I doubt he'll ever become a distinguished monk. How can his face be so ugly? Hurry up, go get firewood and draw water." He began treating me just like a servant. I was startled. I never knew that becoming a monk would lead to this. Though I had become an exile, wandering in all directions, I had hidden in my heart heroic ambitions, a desire for public recognition, and the thought of shedding the skin of a commoner, which had been a lifelong source of resentment, to become a nobleman, an exceptional nobleman, and look down just once upon those nobles who had despised my family. However, now that I had become a monk, these vain ambitions were seen as demons utterly unforgivable, even by a hair's breadth within the Buddhist order. When such wicked thoughts sprouted in my mind, I had to borrow the power of the Dharma-protecting guardian deities and cut them out by the roots with the sword of the emptiness of all dharmas. There were times I laughed to myself and sighed to myself, wondering how I ever ended up entering such a place. But since I had already become a monk, there was no other way but to obey as instructed. I chopped firewood, drew water, and did everything I was told to do. One day, while drawing water, I broke a water bucket and was scolded by the master until my eyeballs felt like they would pop out. He reprimanded me so severely that the old master Baekbeomilji lamented it. Even in the past, when he was given disciples that others said were decent, he treated them so intolerably that he chased them all away. Now he acts like this again. How could even one Jong stay for long? If taught well, he is capable enough to handle his own duties. He rebuked Han Dong like this. Seeing this brought me some comfort. During the day I worked, and at night, along with the other novices, I learned the methods of worship, memorized texts like the Chonsugyong, Thousand Hands Sutra, and Simgyong, Heart Sutra, and also studied the Bogaksojang under Master Yongdam, who had given me the precepts. Yongdam was famous in Magoksa at the time for being well-versed not only in Buddhist studies but also in Confucian scholarship. He was a man who understood the big picture, a high teacher worthy of everyone's respect. A young Buddhist named Hyemyong, a disciple who served Master Yongdam, felt deep sympathy for me, and Master Yongdam also frequently worried about Han Dong's bizarre ways and comforted me. He taught me the principle of patience, quoting, "Pointing at the moon, if you see the moon, that is enough. What does it matter about the finger pointing at it?" He also told me to cut away the angry mind harboring blade-like thoughts. He meant for me to understand that Ha-Indang severely tormenting me was all to aid my spiritual study. Living in this manner, half a year passed, the year of Musul ended, and the year of Gihai began. I was suffering, but the other monks envied me. They said that since both Bogyongdang and Haundang were in their 70s or 80s, if they passed away, all that vast wealth would become mine. Looking at the harvest season alone, they received 200 sak of white rice, and their money and goods amounted to hundreds of thousands of nyang. However, I did not develop the thought of dedicating my life to the Buddhist path of pure extinction. I wanted to know the fate of my parents, of whom I had heard no news since leaving Incheon prison. I wanted to find the whereabouts of Kim Ju-gyong, who had ruined his family and himself while trying to save me. I wanted to visit Master Go Hujo in Bidong. Heijo is Master Go's pen name. And the thought of finding Scholar An of Cheonggyeong, who had left harboring dissatisfaction, misunderstanding me as a traitor to the great cause because I studied Catholicism, to apologize, occasionally fluttered through my mind. Thus, not even in my dreams did the thought of coveting Bogyongdang's wealth arise. So one day, I went to see Bogyongdang and said, "Since this humble monk has already entered the priesthood, I must learn what a monk ought to learn. I will go to Mount Gumgang, study the sutras, and become a faithful Buddhist disciple for life." Hearing my words, Bogyongdang said, "I knew long ago it would come to this. If your wish lies there, what can be done?" He immediately called Haandang to his side. They argued with each other for quite a while, and finally he gave me household goods. Receiving 10 mal of white rice, along with robes and a begging bowl, I left Haandang and moved to the large common room. From that day on, I was free. I sold the 10 mal of rice to make travel money, left Magoksa, and headed towards Seoul. After walking for several days, I arrived in Seoul in the spring of the Gihai year. Until that time, there was a national prohibition against monks and nuns entering the fortress walls of Seoul. While wandering from temple to temple outside the gates, and staying a day at a new temple outside Sodamun, I met my senior Dharma brother, Hyemyong. He said he was on his way to Hwajangsa Temple to see his master, and I said I was on my way to study at Mount Gumgang. I parted ways with Hyemyong and met a monk named Hyejong from Pungi. He said he was on his way to sightsee in Pyongyang, so I asked him to travel with me. After crossing the Imjin River and sightseeing in Songdo, I suggested we see the provincial office in Haeju before heading to Pyongyang, and I led Hyejong to Haeju. While staying at a hermitage called Bugam in Singwangsa Temple on Mount Suyang, I confided some of my circumstances to Hyejong. I asked him to go to my house in Teotgol, secretly meet my parents to find out how they were doing, but to only tell them that I was doing well, without revealing where I was. After making this request, I was waiting for Hyejong's report, when on the evening of April 29th, following behind Hyejong, both my parents arrived. Upon hearing news of me from Hyejong, my parents had said, "You must know where my son is, so if we please follow you, we will see him," and had followed him. We stayed one night at Bugam, and then, taking my parents with me, I set off on the road to Pyongyang with Hyejong, still in the guise of a monk. Piecing together what they said along the way, my parents had returned to our hometown in Haeju on March 9th of the Musul year, but police officers followed them, arrested both of them, and imprisoned them in Incheon on March 13th. My mother was released shortly after, but my father was only released 3 months later. From then on, while staying in our hometown, they lived in constant anxiety, not knowing if I was dead or alive. If they even had a bad dream, they would stop eating and drinking all day. After 2 years of living like this, Hyejong had visited them. Meeting me, they said they were relieved I was alive, but sad that I had become a monk. We arrived in Pyongyang on May 4th and rested for a night at an inn. The next day, on Dano, while returning from watching people on the swings at Moranbong, I met someone who would have a significant impact on my future. While passing through the Guangdong Alley, I saw a man in the guest room of a house, wearing a jipagwan, traditional hat, on his head and a samsui, robe, on his body, sitting politely on his knees, his posture perfectly composed. Suddenly filled with curiosity, I decided to strike up a conversation. Approaching the steps, I said, "This humble monk pays his respects." I pressed my palms together and bowed. The scholar stared at me blankly and then told me to come in. I went in and greeted him. He was Choi Jae-hak, a disciple of Jeon Yu, pen name Ganje, who went by the pen name Gogum and was quite renowned. I mentioned that I was a monk from Magoksa Temple in Gongju, that on my way here I had sought out Master Jeon Ganje in Gumgok, Cheonan, but unfortunately missed him as he was out, and that meeting the distinguished Master Choi by chance was my greatest fortune. We exchanged a few words about philosophy, and Master Choi introduced me to a majestic old man with a fine beard sitting next to him. He was John Hyo-sun, who was serving as a major in the Pyongyang garrison at the time. After the introduction, Choi Gogum said to Major John, "This master has astonishing knowledge, so if you appoint him as the abbot of Yongcheonam Hermitage, it would be beneficial for the studies of your children and grandchildren. What do you think, sir?" He recommended me. Major John replied, "That is a fine idea. Even just listening to him now, I admire the master's eminence. What do you think, master? I have entrusted one of my sons and my grandsons to Master Choi to study at Yongcheonam Hermitage, but the current head monk has poor conduct, only drinking alcohol and completely failing to manage their meals properly, which has been extremely troubling." He asked for my consent. I smiled and said, "How do you know my debauchery won't be worse than the original monks?" I declined once, but inwardly I felt fortunate. I had felt guilty begging with my parents in tow, so I wanted to settle down in one place. Major John visited Hong Sanuk, the deputy magistrate of Pyongyang, and shortly after, he brought an official paper stating, "Monk Wonjong is appointed as the abbot of Yongcheonsa," and urged me to take up the post that very day. Thus, I became the abbot of Yongcheonam. Yongcheonam was a hermitage on Mount Daebo, about 40 li west of Pyongyang, located in a scenic spot overlooking the wide plains of the Daedong River and Pyongyang. I went to Yongcheonam with Hyejong, settled my parents in a quiet room, and shared a room with Hyejong. The students included Jeonhyo-sun's son Byung-son, his son-in-law Kim Yeon-moon's 3 sons, eldest, middle, and youngest, and a few others including Kim Dong-won. Jeonhyo-sun sent good food from Pyongyang every other day, and he arranged for meat to be supplied to Yongcheonsa from a butcher shop in Sinongdong at the foot of the mountain. Every day, I went down, carried a load of meat on my back, boiled it, grilled it, and openly gorged myself while still wearing my monk's robes. Occasionally, I followed Choi Jae-hak into Pyongyang, where at Sasongjae I would exchange poems with poets like Hwang Kyung-hwan and scarf down noodles garnished with meat. I recited only poetry without chanting any sutras, thus becoming what the Buddhists call a monk holding a pig's head in his hands while reading scriptures with his mouth. In this way, I earned the title Poet Monk Wonjong, but I disappointed Hyejong, who had come with me. Seeing my faith wane and my secular desires grow, Hyejong worried greatly, but such advice could not possibly enter the ears of a monk drunk on alcohol and eating meat snacks. Seeing that it would be difficult to restore my Buddhist faith, he decided to leave Yeongcheonam. Carrying his luggage, he went down the mountain, but finding it too hard to part with me, he kept returning for about a month until he finally left for Gyeongsang province. My father also did not want me to shave my head again, so I grew my hair out while still acting as a monk. Late that autumn, I set up a hair extension, tied a top knot, put on the attire of a scholar, and returned to my hometown in Haeju with my parents. There was no one to welcome me back to my hometown. Close friends worried, saying, "Chang-su has returned. I hope he doesn't cause some trouble again," while others sneered at me. Among them, my uncle Junyoung could not bring himself to trust me no matter what. He had now settled down, was respectful to his second eldest brother, my father, and farmed well, but regarding me, he seemed to view me as a hopeless rogue. He said, "If that rascal throws away his useless books and works diligently at farming, I will get him married and set him up with a livelihood, but if he doesn't, I wash my hands of him." He urged my parents to order me to become a farmer. However, my parents had no intention of making me a farmer. They seemed to place their hopes in me, believing I had a great purpose and would become a renowned person in the future. While this issue of whether I would become a farmer or not was being debated among my father's brothers, the Gihaya year ended, and spring of the Gyeongja year arrived, the time to start farming. My uncle seemed determined to make a real man out of his nephew. Every morning he came to our house, woke me from my sweet sleep, fed me, and dragged me to the fields to shovel dirt. I docilely obeyed my uncle's orders for a few days, but my heart just wouldn't settle into it. So I secretly left my hometown and headed for Gangwon. It was regrettable that I couldn't visit Master Go or Scholar An before leaving, but since it wasn't yet the time to move about openly, I decided to go somewhere unfamiliar. Using the alias Kim Do-rae, I arrived in Gangwon, sought out Kim Ju-gyeong's house inside the south gate, and was told there was no news of his whereabouts. His third younger brother, Jin-gyeong, came out and received me. "I am Kim Do-rae from Yeonan. I was a close comrade of your eldest brother, but having not heard from him for several years, I came specifically to find him." I introduced myself this way. Gyeongjin, Jin-gyeong, welcomed me gladly and recounted what had happened. According to him, it had been 3 or 4 years since Ju-gyeong left home with no news, so Jin-gyeong was taking care of his sister-in-law and raising his nephews. Although the house had a thatched roof, it was originally built large and spacious, but having not been maintained for several years, it had fallen into disrepair. In the guest room lay the cushion Ju-gyeong used to sit on, and hanging on the wall was a wooden club, which was said to have been used to personally punish comrades who broke their faith. A 7-year-old boy playing with me was Ju-gyeong's son, named Untae. I told Jin-gyeong that since I had come all this way to find his brother, it would be a shame to just go back, and that I would like to teach Untae how to read for a while as I waited for news. Jin-gyeong replied that he had actually been looking for a teacher, as Untae and the 2 sons of his second eldest brother, Mugyeong, had reached the age to study, but were idling about due to a lack of a suitable teacher. He immediately went to his brother Mugyeong and brought the 2 nephews over. From that day on, I became a teacher at a village school. It was decided that Untae would learn the Dong Sop, first lessons for the young, Mugyeong's eldest son the Saryak Chogwon, abridged history, and his youngest son the Cheonjamun, 1,000-character classic. Rumors spread that I taught well, and gradually the number of students increased, reaching 30 in less than a month. I taught with all my heart and soul. One day after doing this for 3 months, Jin-gyeong muttered something strange to himself. "Well, Yu-in-mu is a strange man too. Why on earth would Kim Chang-soo come to our house?" Hearing this made my heart leap, but I pretended not to notice. Still, Jin-gyeong explained it to me. The story was as follows. Yu-in-mu was a nobleman from Bupyeong who had moved as a mourner to a place about 30 from the town a few years ago, lived there for about 3 years, and then left. At that time, he and Kim Ju-gyeong had become close friends, transcending the distinction between nobleman and commoner. After Kim Chang-soo broke out of Incheon prison and escaped, Yu had sent multiple letters saying to let him know urgently if Kim Chang-soo from Haeju came. This time, he sent a close friend of Kim Ju-gyong named Lee Chun-baek, who lived in Tongjin, telling them not to be suspicious and to tell him any news of Kim Chang-soo. To test if Jin-gyong recognized my appearance, I asked, "Has Kim Chang-soo really never come?" Jin-gyong, looking frustrated, said, "Think about it, brother. Incheon is right around the corner from here. Why would Kim Chang-soo, who is on the run, come here?" "Then Yu In-moo must be a spy for the Japanese," I probed. Jin-gyong replied, "No. Scholar Yu is not that kind of gentleman. I haven't met him personally, but my brother said Scholar Yu is different from ordinary nobles who hold office. He has the spirit of a true scholar." He highly praised Yu In-moo's character. I thought asking further would look suspicious, so I stopped and kept my mouth shut. After breakfast the next day, a tall man, perhaps 50 years old, with a slightly pockmarked face, walked into the guest room without hesitation. Seeing Yun-tae, who was studying in front of me, he said, "You've grown quite a bit. Go inside and tell your uncle to come out. Tell him I'm here." By his manner, I figured this was Lee Chun-baek. "Haven't heard any news of your eldest brother?" "Still no news. That's worrisome. Did you see Yu In-moo's letter?" "Yes, I received it yesterday." After this exchange between the guest and host, Jin-gyong closed the sliding door, blocking off the room I was sitting in, and the two talked privately. I ignored the sound of the children reciting texts and strained my ears to listen to the two men. Their conversation went like this. "Scholar Yu lacks sense. Why does he keep sending letters thinking Kim Chang-soo would come to our house when my brother isn't even here? What you say makes sense, but there's nowhere else to inquire, is there? He wouldn't have gone to his hometown in Haeju, and even if they knew where Kim Chang-soo was, why would they divulge it? As for Yu In-moo, while living in the southern regions, he came to Seoul and heard that your brother had squandered his fortune and fled to parts unknown trying to save Kim Chang-soo. Admiring your brother's righteousness, he resolved to save Kim Chang-soo no matter what. Realizing that since your brother had done everything legal, possible to no avail, it had to be done by force. He organized a 13-man suicide squad. I was one of them. We planned to carry a canister of kerosene each into 7 or 8 key locations in Incheon port, set them on fire, and break the prison to save Kim Chang-soo in the ensuing chaos. Yu In-moo told me to take 2 men and go to Incheon to scout the prison layout, but when we got there, Kim Chang-soo had already fled 3 days earlier with 4 other prisoners. That's what happened. So wouldn't Yu In-moo be anxious for news of your brother or Kim Chang-soo? Has there really been no letter or anything from Kim Chang-soo? No letter either. If he were going to send a letter and wait for a reply, he would just come himself. That's true too. Are you planning to go to Seoul now, Mr. Lee? I'll look up a few friends today and go tomorrow. I'll drop by again when I leave. After this conversation, Lee Chun-baek left. I decided to trust Yu In-moo and seek him out. I could not ignore someone who had such sincerity toward me. Even if he turned out to be a spy feigning sincerity, the superior man goes where righteousness leads him. If I was deceived believing in righteousness, the fault was not mine. If I did not trust him after he had done this much, I considered it my own unrighteousness. So I asked Jin-gyong to introduce me to Lee Chun-baek when he came the next day. The next morning, I confessed to Jin-gyong that I was Kim Chang-soo and told him I would leave with Lee Chun-baek to meet Yu In-moo. Jin-gyong was shocked. Then he said, "If you insist, brother, how can I stop you?" He mentioned that Choi Deok-man, the head guard at Incheon prison who had first informed Kim Ju-gyong of my words, had died the previous year. He told the students to go home because their teacher was going to his main house today. Soon, Lee Chun-baek arrived. Jin-gyong introduced me to him. I said I was also going to Seoul and suggested we travel together, and Lee Chun-baek happily agreed, thinking of me as an ordinary travel companion. Jin-gyong pulled Chun-baek by the sleeve into the back room, seemingly to tell him my story. Finally, I left Jin-gyong's house with Lee Chun-baek. On the main street of the South Gate, all 30 students and their parents gathered, blocking the road to see me off. It seemed that my pouring my heart and soul into teaching them, without receiving any tuition, had moved their hearts, and it made me happy. We arrived at the house of Sholar Park Taebyong in Gongdeokri that same day. Lee Chun-baek went into the inner guest room first, and after a while, a scholar of below-average height with a somewhat dark, sun-tanned face, wearing a headband, a black gat, and plain clothes, came out and welcomed me into the room. I am Yuin Mu. You've had a hard journey coming here. They say men who meet will meet no matter where they are, and I've finally met you, Brother Chang-su. Yuin Mu's face was beaming with joy as he looked at Chun-baek and said, I told you, there is no need to lose heart over failing once or twice. If you keep seeking until the end, there is a day you will find it. Didn't I tell you that before? From his words, I could glimpse the state of their hearts as they had searched for me. I said to Yuin Mu, at Kim Ju-gyong's house in Gangwa, I learned of the tremendous efforts you, sir, made for a person like me, and today I behold your esteemed face. However, having heard exaggerated tales in the world and now seeing the real me, I know you must be disappointed. I am ashamed. When I reviewed my past, it felt like the head of a dragon and the tail of a snake. Yuin Mu smiled and said, if you grab the snake's tail and climb up, you'll see the dragon's head. The host, Park Taebyong, said he was Yuin Mu's brother-in-law. I ate dinner at Scholar Park's house, went to Yuin Mu's lodging inside the city gates, and stayed there, visiting restaurants, having fun, sightseeing, and wandering around. A few days later, Yuin Mu gave me a letter and travel money, directing me to the house of Lee Chong-gyong in Dorimri, Gwanggidari, Yeonsan, Chungcheong Province. Lee Chong-gyong warmly welcomed me, fed me well, and conversed with me for a month. Then he gave me another letter and travel money, sending me to Lee Si-bal, who ran a ginseng farm in Mujuup, Jeolla Province. I stayed at Lee Si-bal's house for one night, received a letter from him, and went to find Song Tae-yong in Cheongguk, Jiria County. Because Song Tae-yong's grandfather had served as the magistrate of Wonju, they called the house Song Wonju's residence. Entering the gate, there were dozens of servants in the waiting rooms and servants' quarters, and everyone sitting in the guest room had an aristocratic air. When the host, Song Tae-yong, read the letter from Lee Si-bal, he greatly welcomed me and sat me in the seat of honor. And the servants treated me even more deferentially. Song Tae-yong's courtesy name was Nong-ha, and his pen name was Il-ju. Song Tae-yong led me on pleasant outings, sometimes climbing mountains to pick wild vegetables, sometimes going to the water to look at fish, and sometimes discussing ancient and modern history by lamplight. About a month had passed like this when one day Yuin Mu arrived at Song Tae-yong's house. We joyfully met, slept together for a night at Song Tae-yong's house, and the next morning we went together to Yuin Mu's house, located in the same Muju town, where I ate and slept from then on. Anticipating that it would be inconvenient for me to go by my real name, Kim Chang-su, Yuin Mu gave me the single-character name Gu, meaning turtle, the courtesy name Yeon-sang, and the pen name Yeon-ha. And when he called me, he used the pen name Yeon-ha. Yuin Mu had a married eldest daughter and 2 sons at home. The eldest was named Han Gyong, and the Muju magistrate Lee Tak also seemed to be related by marriage. Yuin Mu explained the reason why he had rotated me here and there during that time. Lee Chong-gyong, Lee Si-bal, Song Tae-yong, and Yuin Mu were all comrades. Whenever they acquired a new person, their agreement was to rotate the person through the comrades' houses, a month here, a while there, just as I had experienced, to observe their character. By synthesizing the results, if the person was suitable for government office, they would be put into office. If suitable for business or farming, they would do that. Yuin Mu said that as a result of these trials, since my scholarship was still shallow, they wanted me to study more. Furthermore, to elevate my status as a commoner, they intended to buy a house in Yeonsan from Lee Chong-gyong for my parents to live in, collude with some local nobles, and insert my family into the aristocratic class. After giving this explanation, Yuin Mu lamented, "In our country right now, you cannot get anything done unless you belong to the noble class." Grateful for Yuin Mu's deep intentions, I decided to go to my hometown, stay with my parents until February, and then move them to the Yeonsan property. Yuin Mu gave me a letter to deliver to Scholar Ju Yun-ho in Baekbeomilji, Gangwa. I asked for news of Kim Ju-gyong's family, but he said there was still no news. Scholar Ju brought out 4,000 yang of brass coins for me to use as travel money. I had no idea how many comrades Yu Inmu had, and they never failed each other in anything, all with just a single letter. Scholar Ju's house was by the sea, and even though it was the 11th lunar month, persimmons were still hanging in clusters on the trees, and fish were abundant, so I was treated well for several days. I put the force in a money belt, wrapped it tightly around my body, left Gangwa, and headed for Seoul. While staying at Yumu's house in Seoul, one night I had a dream where my father told me to write the characters for Yellow Springs, the underworld, and I told Yuinmu about E. When I left the previous spring, I had seen my father recovering slightly from an illness. I had come to Seoul, had herbal medicine prepared, mailed it to him, and had been unable to ease my mind. Having such an ominous dream, I could not delay for even a day and set off for Haeju the very next day. Arriving in Haeju after 4 days to see Master Go in Bidong, he had aged so much over the past 4 or 5 years that he seemed unable to read without a magnifying glass. He told me that his eldest granddaughter, to whom I had been betrothed, had been married off as a daughter-in-law to a farming family named Kim Sajip in Cheonggyeong. His younger granddaughter, who used to call me uncle, was already over 10 years old, and seeing her recognize me and still call me uncle filled me with deep emotion. Master Go also mentioned that he had spoken of my killing the Japanese man to Ryu Uyam, Ryu In-sok, and Ryu Uyam had recorded me as a righteous man in the sequel to his book Soisenpyeon. Master Go added that when Uyam, having failed in his righteous army uprising, came to Pyeongsan, Master Go had told him what I reported when I returned from West Jendao, and so Uyam decided to go there to establish a base and raise an army. He suggested that since Uyam had enshrined an image of Confucius there and was gathering and training warriors, how about I go there as well? However, Master Go's ideology of revering China and expelling the barbarians no longer had the power to move me. I strongly argued my new ideas, but they did not seem to enter Master Go's ears, as he only said, "You have become an Enlightenment advocate, haven't you?" I spoke of the great power of Western civilization, explaining that it was absolutely impossible to resist it merely with top knots, and quoting Confucius and Mencius. I explained that unless our country imported that civilization, implemented modern education, and reformed all systems in the Western style, we could not preserve the lifeblood of our nation. However, he rejected my words, saying he would rather see the country perish than follow the ways of barbarians, leaving me no way to persuade him. The master was already a man of a different era than me. Yet, seeing that not even a single matchstick of foreign make was used in Master Go's household seemed highly noble. I stayed one night with the master, and leaving the next day became our final parting. According to what has been passed down, Master Go later died away from home at the house of a relative in Jecheon, Chungcheong province, sad and sorrowful. Even today, as I record these words, more than 30 years later, if there is anything right in my intentions and actions, it is entirely the power of the teachings I received in Cheonggyeong, which the master imparted to me heart to heart, pouring his soul into them. To never be able to see his deeply affectionate, esteemed face again in this world. Ah, it is sad and painful. I bid farewell to Master Go and arrived at my home in Teokgol that same day at dusk. As I entered the inner courtyard, my mother came out of the kitchen and said, "Oh, you've come. Your father's condition is critical. Earlier he said, 'If the boy is here, why doesn't he come in but stands in the yard?' Which I took for delirium, but you really have come." I rushed in to see him. My father was glad, but his condition was indeed critical. I devotedly prepared his medicine, but seeing no effect, my father passed away 14 days later, resting his head on my lap. The grip of my father's hands, which had held mine tightly, slowly loosened, and he immediately breathed his last. Even until the day before he passed away, I had secretly hoped to take my parents to Yonsan, following the goodwill of my lifelong friends Yu In-mu and Song Tae-young, so they could escape the bone-deep resentment of being treated as commoners by the Kang and Lee families in their twilight years. But now he had departed on a road fro, which he would never return, a regret for eternity. Because our house was in a remote mountain village and our family was inherently poor, we were in no position to afford famous doctors or miracle drugs. I remembered how my father had cut off his finger, Danji, when my grandmother was dying, and I thought I would do the same to hold on to my father's life for even a moment. However, fearing my mother's heartbreak if she saw me do it, instead of cutting off a finger, I cut off a piece of flesh from my thigh, caught the blood to drip into my father's mouth, and grilled the flesh, giving it to him as medicine. Still, seeing no noticeable effect, I thought the amount of blood and flesh was too small. So I took the knife again, intending to cut a much larger piece than before. I sliced deeply, but when it came time to cut it off, it hurt so terribly that I only made the cut and could not detach it. I lamented to myself that cutting off a finger is something only a filial son can do, and an unfilial son like me could not do it. As the sole mourner receiving condolences, I couldn't leave the mourning room. My leg hurt, and the cold wind pierced my flesh, bringing me to the point of regretting having cut my leg at all. I sent obituaries to Yuanmu and Song Taeyong, but Yuanmu was not in Seoul. So Song Taeyong rode his donkey alone for 500 to offer his condolences. While in mourning, I didn't go out anywhere and helped my uncle Junyong with farming. He seemed very pleased with me and ordered me to marry the daughter of a commoner in a neighboring village, offering 200 of his own money. My uncle, who considered it his natural duty and a great honor to marry off his fatherless nephew with his own power, became furious and lunged at me with a sickle when he saw me refuse, saying I wouldn't marry even a minister's daughter if it meant using his money. My mother intervened and helped me escape. In January of the Imin year, I went to pay New Year's respects to a distant relative's house in Jangyeon. An elder I called grandmother asked if I had any intention of marrying her 17-year-old niece from her maiden family. I said I would marry only if 3 conditions were met. Those 3 conditions were: no talk of money, the bride-to-be must be educated, and the parties involved must meet face-to-face and converse. One day, the grandmother dragged me to the girl's house. Her mother was a widow raising 4 daughters. The older 3 were all married, and the one being discussed with me now was the youngest daughter, Yeoko. I was told Yeok had mastered the Korean alphabet and was good at sewing. The house was a tiny hut, as small as could be. Leaving me seated in the room, the 3 of them whispered in the kitchen for a long time, then said that, while they could agree to everything else, a face-to-face meeting between the 2 of us was difficult. A woman who avoids meeting me face-to-face is not qualified to be my wife, I stated firmly. As a result of my strong stance, the girl was brought in. I offered a greeting to her, but she remained silent. I asked again, "Do you have the intention to marry me?" Still, there was no answer. I continued, "I am currently in mourning, so the wedding will take place after I finish the mourning period in a year. During that time, will you call me teacher and learn to read and write from me?" I still did not hear the girl's answer in my ears, but the grandmother and the girl's mother said that Yeok had agreed to everything. Thus, she and I became engaged. Even when I returned home and told my uncle Junyong that I had engaged to such and such a girl, he didn't believe me and told my mother to go and see for herself. Only after my mother went to find out did he sneer, "There are all kinds of foolish people in the world." I compiled what could be called a primer for women and taught my future wife whenever I had the chance. Before long, a year passed, and in February of Higimyo year, after my father's memorial service ended, my mother was busy saying I must get married quickly. Just then, news arrived that Yeok was critically ill. When I rushed over in shock, Yeok still had the presence of mind to be glad to see me, but she had been suffering from a severe intestinal cold for a long time, which easily developed into pneumonia. Furthermore, without access to medicine, she simply died 3 days after I arrived. I personally shrouded her body and buried her on Namsan Mountain, and I guided my mother-in-law to Kim-dong, Kim Yun-ho's house, so she could believe in Jesus and spend the rest of her life there. I suffered this tragedy at the age of 30. In February of this year, I moved to Sajikdong in Jangyeon-up. It was a property given to me by Scholar Oh In-hyung so that I could engage in public work without worrying about housing, including about 20 jiggy, a unit of land area, of paddies and fields, along with mountains and an orchard. I brought my cousin Tesu and his wife from Heiju to look after the house, and I established a school in the guest room of Scholar O's house. I gathered students, Scholar O's daughter Sine, his son Gi-won, Oh Bong-hyung's 2 sons, Oh Myeon-hyung's son and daughter, Oh Sun-hyung's 2 daughters, and several other boys and girls. I separated the seating for boys and girls by placing a folding screen in the middle of the room. Sun-hyung was In-hyung's 3rd younger brother. He was a diligent man who believed deeply in Jesus and was enthusiastic about education, so he taught the students with me and preached Christianity. Within a year, the church flourished and the school gradually expanded. At that time, I led Baekbeomilji, who frequented places of debauchery, to believe in Jesus and become a teacher at Pongyang School, while I became a teacher at a public school. At that time in Hwanghae Province, there were only 2 places with the name school, 1 public school each in Heiju and Jangyeon. The one in Heiju was a school in name only, still teaching the 4 books and 3 classics, while the only one genuinely hanging a blackboard and teaching modern subjects like arithmetic, geography, and history was the Jangyeon School. In the summer, when I went to a normal school training institute hosted by the Pyongyang Christian Church, I met Choi Gwang-ok. He was a student at Sungsil Middle School and was highly renowned as an educator and patriot, and we shared the same ideals. Hearing that I was still single, Choi Gwang-ok recommended I marry a modern woman named An Sin-ho. She was the younger sister of Dosan An Chang-ho, 20 years old, extremely lively, and Choi Gwang-ok described her as a shining star among the new women of the time. I met An Sin-ho for the first time at the house of An Dosan's father-in-law, Lee Seok-gwan. The host, Mr. Lee, and Choi Gwang-ok were together with us. After the meeting, I returned to my lodging, and Choi Gwang-ok followed me to convey that he had obtained An Sin-ho's consent. So I believed I was betrothed to An Sin-ho. But the next day, Lee Seok-gwan and Choi Gwang-ok rushed over and informed me that the engagement was broken. The reason was as follows. On his way to America, An Do-san had proposed marriage for Sin-ho to Yang Ju-sam, who was attending a middle school in Shanghai at the time, and Yang Ju-sam had also written a letter to Sin-ho saying they should decide after he graduated. However, yesterday, after she became engaged to me, a letter arrived from Yang Ju-sam saying he had now graduated, so she should consent to the marriage. Receiving this letter, Sin-ho agonized all night. Having a cake in each hand, it was difficult to choose one and discard the other, so she rejected both Yang Ju-sam and Kim Koo, deciding to marry Kim Song-taek, who later became a pastor, a man she grew up with in the same village. If so, there was nothing to be done, but I felt very disappointed. But shortly after, Sin-ho personally came to see me, apologized, and said she would call me older brother. In return, I actually admired her refreshing decisiveness. Once, the magistrate Yoon Gu-young called for me and entrusted me with the task of going to Heiju to bring back mulberry tree seedlings sent by the Ministry of Agriculture, Commerce, and Industry. Jung Chang-gyok, a clerk, had recommended me to the magistrate. I received 200 nyang for travel expenses and walked to Heiju. I was told to ride a horse or a palanquin, but I did not. In Heiju, an official dispatched from the Ministry of Agriculture, Commerce, and Industry was distributing the seedlings to each county. The government had imported mulberry seedlings from Japan to promote sericulture nationwide. The seedlings were all dried up. I asked what the use of dried seedlings was and refused to accept them, at which the official grew furious, scolding me for disobeying higher orders. I met his anger with my own, saying we must find out whose responsibility it was that the seedlings sent by the country had dried out, and threatened to report the matter to the provincial governor. The official seemed frightened and pleaded with me to pick out fresh ones as I pleased. Thus, I picked out thousands of live seedlings, loaded them on a horse, and returned. I spent a total of 70 nyang on travel expenses and returned 130 to Jung Chang-gyok. I wrote down exactly where the money was spent, how much for a pair of straw shoes, how much for a bowl of cold noodles, and so on, and gave it back along with the remaining money. Jung Chang-gyok looked at it, dumbfounded, and said, If everyone were like you, sir, there would be no worries for the affairs of the nation. If anyone else had gone, they would have claimed at least another 200. Jung Chang-guk was truly an honest official. At that time, regardless of high or low rank, every official was corrupt, stealing from the country and the people. But Jung Chang-guk alone never took a single penny beyond what he was owed. Because of this, even the magistrate dared not extort the people. A little while later, a letter of appointment arrived from the Ministry of Agriculture, Commerce, and Industry, appointing me as a sericulture committee member. This was a high position, so low-ranking officials and commoners would even hide their tobacco pipes and bow their waists when I passed by. However, I found myself having to leave the house in Sajikdong, where I had lived for 2 years. That was due to the deaths of Scholar O and my cousin. Scholar O ran a fishing boat, but ruined his fortune in 2 years and passed away, so I had no choice but to return the Sajikdong property to his bereaved family. Also, my cousin had originally been completely illiterate, but after following me to Jangyeon and believing in Jesus, he became fluent in Korean, read religious books, and even preached from the pulpit. Unfortunately, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage during a worship service and passed away. Thus, I permitted my cousin's wife to remarry and sent her back to her maiden home, while I moved to the town center with my mother. While I was in Sajikdong, Yoo In-moo and Ju Yun-ho came to visit. They had come to seek comrades domestically to establish a base in West Jiandao in collaboration with the former Jiandao administrator, So Sang-moo. Saying they were people who loved me, my mother boiled chestnuts and slaughtered a chicken, treating them with devotion. Eating the chestnuts and chicken meat, we discussed national affairs late into the night, day after day. After experiencing engagements being made and broken several times, I finally had a controversial marriage with Choi Junrae from Sapyeongdong, Sincheon. Junrae was originally born in Seoul, the youngest of 2 daughters raised by her mother, Lady Kim, who was a young widow. Lady Kim was employed at Jejungwon, now Severance, temporarily set up in Gurige. She raised her 2 daughters, married the eldest off to a doctor named Sin Chang-hui, and when Sin Chang-hui opened a practice in Sincheon, she brought the 8-year-old Junrae to Sincheon and lived in her son-in-law's house. I was engaged to Junrae through the matchmaking of Elder Yang Song-chik, but this caused a huge problem in the church. It was nothing other than the fact that Junrae's mother had betrothed Junrae to a man named Kang Song-mo, but Junrae disobeyed her mother and consented to marry me instead. The 18-year-old Junrae was claiming the freedom to marry. Even 2 American missionaries, William Hunt and Charles Bernheisel, stepped in and urged Junrae to marry Kang Song-mo, but Junrae naturally refused. There were also people who advised me not to go through with this marriage, but objecting to a parent's arranged marriage that ignored the individual's freedom. I made up my mind to marry Junrae no matter what. I had Sin Chang-hui bring Junrae to my house in Sajikdong, made a firm betrothal, and then sent her off to study at Jongsin Girls' School in Seoul. Junrae and I were disciplined by the church for rebelling against it, but shortly after, Reverend Bernheisel prepared our marriage certificate and lifted the discipline on both of us, and thus I finally became a married man. The warm affection of someone who willingly shared even amidst hunger and exhaustion, and the profound silence of the deep mountains that made one forget all the fierce agonies of the world. Just as the long, endless wandering came to a brief pause, your long day now peacefully comes to a close as well. Leave all the many worries you carried during the day, and the thoughts meandering through your mind covered in the darkness of the deep night. At this very moment, all you need to leave behind is the sound of your own relaxed, even breathing. Just as the pitch-black night, where you couldn't see an inch ahead, passed and the dawn unfailingly broke bright, your tomorrow will also dawn with a warm light. Slow night, ancient tales. I hope you have deep and peaceful dreams again tonight. Good night.